They kicked me out of the family business to promote my cousin, but they don't know who owns it. The letter sat on my desk like a tombstone, its edges crisp and sharp as if mocking me with their precision. I stared at it for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was probably only minutes. The words effective immediately burned into my mind like acid etching glass. My hands trembled as I read them again. We regret to inform you that your position within Landon and Company is no longer required. We have decided to promote Eleanor to take over operations moving forward. Eleanor. My cousin. The golden child who could do no wrong in our family's eyes. She'd always been the favorite, the one everyone fawned over at holiday dinners, the one whose laugh filled every room she entered, the one who never had to try too hard because her charm seemed innate. And now, they were handing her the reins to the business I'd poured my soul into for nearly a decade. I crumpled the paper in my fist, anger surging through me so violently that I thought I might explode. How dare they? How dare they dismiss me like this after everything I'd done? This wasn't just some job, it was my life. Our family legacy. Or so I'd believed. But there was something else eating away at me, gnawing at the corners of my heart even more than the betrayal itself. Something none of them knew. Something I'd kept hidden all these years, buried deep beneath layers of loyalty, fear, and pride. A secret so monumental that it would shatter the very foundation of everything they held dear. Because while they thought they owned Landon and Company, they didn't. Not really. Not anymore. It started when I was 22, fresh out of college with stars in my eyes and dreams bigger than my small-town roots. My father, God rest his soul, had built Landon and Company from nothing. He'd turned a modest textile mill into a thriving empire, expanding into luxury goods and international markets by the time I was born. It was his crown jewel, his greatest achievement, and he wanted nothing more than to pass it down to his children. To us. To me. At least, that's what he said. But then cancer came calling, swift and merciless, leaving him bedridden and frail before any of us were ready. On his deathbed, he called me to his side, gripping my hand with surprising strength despite his weakened state. His voice was barely above a whisper, but his words cut through me like a blade. "Take care of it," he rasped, staring up at me with eyes clouded by pain yet fierce with determination. "Promise me you'll protect it." "I will," I whispered back, tears streaming down my face. "I promise." He nodded once, satisfied, and closed his eyes forever. That moment sealed my fate, or so I thought. What followed was chaos. My mother, overwhelmed by grief, retreated into herself, leaving the company vulnerable. My Uncle Richard swooped in like a vulture, taking control under the guise of helping, until he declared himself CEO outright. Overnight, the business that should have belonged to my siblings and me became his domain. My protests fell on deaf ears. I was young, inexperienced, and powerless against his authority. For years, I watched from the sidelines as Richard dismantled pieces of my father's vision, steering the company toward profit-driven decisions that sacrificed quality and integrity. But I couldn't give up. Not completely. Instead, I worked tirelessly behind the scenes, learning every aspect of the operation until I knew it better than anyone else. I clawed my way up from internships to management positions, earning respect not through nepotism but through sheer grit and determination. By the time I was 30, I'd become indispensable, the backbone holding the entire enterprise together. And then Eleanor returned. She'd spent most of her 20s gallivanting across Europe, chasing boyfriends and art galleries instead of responsibilities. When she finally deigned to join the family business, she walked in like she owned the place, literally. Within months, she was given roles and titles I'd fought years to earn. Her ideas, no matter how impractical or untested, were lauded as genius. Meanwhile, mine were dismissed as overly cautious or outdated. The imbalance grew unbearable, but I endured it, clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, I'd prove myself worthy of the trust my father had placed in me. That day never came. Instead, I received the letter. Sitting alone in my office later that evening, I replayed the meeting in my head over and over, dissecting every word, every glance, every subtle jab disguised as concern. Uncle Richard had delivered the news personally, flanked by Eleanor and the board members who nodded along obediently. His tone was apologetic, almost sympathetic, but his eyes betrayed him. There was triumph there, satisfaction. He thought he'd won. They all did. "You've done incredible work here, Clara," he'd said, his voice smooth as silk. "But we feel it's time for new leadership. Fresh perspectives. Eleanor has big plans for the future, and we believe she's the right person to lead us into the next chapter. I'd wanted to scream. To demand answers. To remind them that I'd practically rebuilt the company single-handedly after years of neglect. But I bit my tongue, knowing it wouldn't make a difference. They'd already made up their minds. All I could do was nod stiffly, force a smile, and walk away with whatever dignity I had left. Now, surrounded by the silence of my empty office, I let the tears fall freely. Each drop carried the weight of years of sacrifice, rejection, and unspoken resentment. For so long, I'd convinced myself that staying silent was the right thing to do. That keeping the peace mattered more than asserting myself. But now, sitting here with nothing left to lose, I realized how wrong I'd been. Because they didn't know. None of them did. 3 years earlier, during one of Richard's ill-conceived cost-cutting measures, I discovered something shocking. The company was drowning in debt. Years of reckless spending and poor investments had left Landon and Company on the brink of collapse. Desperate to save it, I'd taken drastic action. Using funds from an inheritance left to me by my grandmother, a woman who'd always believed in me, even when others didn't, I secretly purchased controlling shares of the company through a series of anonymous transactions. No one suspected a thing. Not Richard, not Eleanor, not even my own mother. At first, I'd intended to reveal the truth, to use my newfound leverage to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But as time went on, I found myself hesitating. Watching Richard and Eleanor bicker over trivialities while I quietly steered the ship gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Knowing I held the power to bring them crashing down whenever I chose became its own kind of revenge. So I waited, biding my time, letting them believe they were untouchable. Until today. The knock on my door startled me out of my thoughts. Wiping my cheeks hastily, I called out, "Come in." My assistant, Mia, peeked her head inside, her expression soft with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I heard about what happened." I managed a weak smile. "Word travels fast around here." She stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No," I said quickly, perhaps too sharply. Then softer, "No thank you. I just need some time to process." Mia hesitated, clearly unsure whether to push further. Finally, she nodded. "If you change your mind, I'm here. You've always been there for me, Clara. Let me return the favor." Her kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Thank you, Mia. That means a lot." After she left, I sank back into my chair, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Mia was right. I'd always been there for her, just as I'd been there for countless employees, clients, and even family members who took my support for granted. I'd spent my entire life putting others first, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of the company. And where had it gotten me? Alone. Betrayed. Forgotten. As night fell, I packed up my belongings, stuffing folders and mementos into boxes with trembling hands. Every item I touched felt like a piece of my identity slipping away. Photographs of team celebrations, awards I'd earned, notes scrawled in the margins of reports, all remnants of a life I'd built and lost. By the time I reached the final drawer, I was numb, my emotions dulled by exhaustion and disbelief. And then I saw it. Tucked away in the corner, partially hidden beneath a stack of old invoices, was a small wooden box. My breath caught as I pulled it free, running my fingers over the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. My father had given it to me on my 18th birthday, calling it a reminder of where you come from. Inside, nestled among faded letters and trinkets, was the original deed to Landon and Company, signed in his elegant handwriting. A lump rose in my throat as I traced the ink with trembling fingertips. This wasn't just a document, it was a promise. A legacy. A reminder that no matter how far they tried to push me away, this company would always be part of me. Part of us. Clutching the box to my chest, I stood and gazed out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Richard and Eleanor were celebrating their victory, oblivious to the storm brewing on the horizon. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd silenced me for good. But they were wrong. Oh, how very wrong they were. The city lights blurred together as tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away fiercely. This wasn't the time for weakness. Not anymore. For years, I'd let them dictate my worth, define my place, and strip me of my voice. But now, with the deed clutched tightly in one hand and the knowledge of my secret ownership burning like a fire inside me, I felt something stir, a quiet rage that refused to be extinguished. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the cool glass of the window pane. My reflection stared back at me, tired, broken, yet somehow defiant. The Clara who had walked into this office hours ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, someone who understood the cost of silence and the power of secrets. Someone ready to fight back. Mia found me still standing there when she returned early the next morning, armed with coffee and a worried expression. "You're here," she said softly, setting the steaming cup on my desk. "I wasn't sure if you'd come in today." "I couldn't stay away," I admitted, turning to face her. "This company, it's not just a job to me. It's everything. And they don't get to take that away." She studied me for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly. "What are you going to do?" I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Mia had been loyal to me through thick and thin, never questioning my decisions or doubting my abilities. She deserved honesty, but not recklessness. So instead of answering directly, I asked, "Do you trust me?" Her response was immediate. "With my life." That simple statement hit me harder than I expected. Loyalty like hers was rare, especially in a world where people were quick to abandon ship when the waters got rough. Yet here she was, standing by my side even as the tide turned against me. It gave me strength, reminding me that I wasn't entirely alone. "Good," I said finally, offering her a small smile. "Because things are about to get complicated." Over the next few days, I threw myself into planning, poring over financial records, shareholder agreements, and legal documents late into the night. My apartment became a makeshift war room, cluttered with papers and notes scrawled in shorthand only I could decipher. Every detail mattered, every loophole needed exploiting. I couldn't afford mistakes, not when so much was at stake. Richard and Eleanor remained blissfully unaware of my activities, parading around the office as though nothing had changed. Their arrogance infuriated me, fueling my determination to expose their incompetence and reclaim what was rightfully mine. They held meetings without inviting me, made decisions without consulting me, and celebrated milestones as if I'd never contributed anything of value. It was almost laughable how easily they dismissed my absence, assuming I was too defeated to retaliate. But I wasn't defeated. Far from it. One evening, as I sifted through a stack of old contracts, I stumbled upon something unexpected, an email thread between Richard and several board members discussing potential mergers. At first glance, it seemed innocuous enough, a routine exploration of growth opportunities. But buried within the attachments was a proposal that sent chills down my spine. They were considering selling Landon and Company. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Selling the company wasn't just a betrayal of my father's legacy, it was a death sentence for everything we'd worked so hard to build. Under new ownership, the brand would lose its soul, reduced to another cog in some corporate machine. Employees would be laid off, traditions abandoned, and decades of history erased in the name of profit. And worst of all, Richard didn't care. To him, this was just another business deal, a chance to cash out while the getting was good. He'd already lined his pockets with bonuses and golden parachutes, ensuring he'd walk away unscathed regardless of the outcome. As for Eleanor, she viewed the sale as a stepping stone to bigger and better things, oblivious to the lives she'd ruin along the way. My hands shook as I closed the document, anger simmering beneath my skin like molten lava. If I hadn't been certain before, I was now. I couldn't let this happen. Not under my watch. Not while I still had a say in the matter. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, slipping past security with the ease of someone who belonged. Though technically no longer employed by Landon and Company, I still had access to key systems thanks to a little foresight, and a well-placed IT contact. Logging into my old workstation, I began gathering evidence, emails, financial reports, internal memos, anything that could prove Richard's mismanagement and seal his fate. By midday, I had everything I needed. All that remained was execution. I called an emergency meeting of the board, citing urgent matters regarding the future of the company. Predictably, Richard scoffed at the request, dismissing it as unnecessary drama. But when I reminded him that I still controlled the majority of voting shares, a fact conveniently omitted from official records, he reluctantly agreed to attend. As I waited for the meeting to begin, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. For years, I'd played the part of the dutiful niece, the obedient employee, the silent partner. Now it was time to step out of the shadows and claim my rightful place. When the boardroom doors swung open, I stood at the head of the table, flanked by Mia and a team of lawyers I'd hired specifically for this occasion. Richard entered last, flanked by Eleanor and a smug-looking executive assistant carrying a stack of folders. His expression shifted from irritation to confusion as he realized the setup. "What is this?" he demanded, glaring at me. "Some kind of coup?" "In a manner of speaking," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Please, have a seat. We have much to discuss." He hesitated, clearly sensing danger, but ultimately sat down, gesturing for the others to follow suit. Once everyone was settled, I began laying out my case. Years of reckless spending, questionable investments, and blatant disregard for the company's long-term viability. Each point was backed by irrefutable evidence, presented with clinical precision. By the time I reached the merger proposal, the room was deathly silent. Even Eleanor looked pale, her usual confidence shaken by the weight of what she'd helped orchestrate. "And finally," I concluded, pulling out the deed to Landon and Company, "let's address the elephant in the room. Contrary to popular belief, this company does not belong to you, Uncle Richard. It belongs to me." Gasps rippled through the room as I placed the document on the table, sliding it toward the stunned faces of the board members. Richard's jaw dropped, his eyes darting between the deed and me as if trying to process what he was seeing. "That's impossible," he sputtered, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't." "Oh, but I can," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 3 years ago, I purchased controlling shares anonymously. Every decision you've made since has been subject to my approval, or lack thereof." For a moment, nobody spoke. The air crackled with tension, heavy with the implications of what I'd revealed. Then, slowly, murmurs broke out among the board members, their expressions shifting from shock to calculation. "You've ruined us," Richard spat, his face red with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "No," I said coldly, rising to my feet. "What you've done is ruin this company. And today, you'll answer for it." With that, I turned to the board, delivering my final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, I move to vote Richard Landon out of his position as CEO, effective immediately. All those in favor?" Every hand went up, including Eleanor's, though hers trembled visibly as she raised it. As Richard stormed out of the room, shouting threats and curses, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would be lawsuits, counterattacks, and endless battles ahead. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. Empowered. Ready to face whatever came next. Because now, they knew the truth. And the game had only just begun. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and corporate maneuvering. Richard tried to fight back, filing injunctions and rallying allies, but the evidence against him was insurmountable. The board, eager to distance themselves from his mismanagement, threw their full support behind me. Eleanor, humiliated and betrayed by her own father's recklessness, retreated from the spotlight altogether. With Richard ousted and the merger plans scrapped, I stepped into the role I'd always been destined for, CEO of Landon and Company. But this time, it wasn't about revenge or proving myself, it was about honoring my father's legacy. I implemented reforms to prioritize quality over profit, rehired laid-off employees, and restored the values that had once made our company great. Mia became my right hand, her unwavering loyalty rewarded with a promotion to Chief Operations Officer. Together, we rebuilt the business from the ground up, earning back the trust of clients and employees alike. One evening, as I stood in my father's old office, now mine, I held the wooden box containing the deed in my hands. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of gratitude, for the lessons learned, the challenges overcome, and the family I'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born into. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Mia, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said with a smile. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I knew exactly where I belonged, and who I was fighting for. As I gazed out at the city skyline, I whispered softly, "I kept my promise, Dad." And in that moment, I felt his presence, steady and proud, guiding me forward.